Hello and welcome to Car Dealer Live. My name is James Batchelor and thank you for joining us for these live broadcasts on the Car Dealer channel every week. Now, today on the show, we're chatting about car subscriptions. Now, it's a different type of car ownership, and I use the word ownership in its broadest sense. Now, car subscriptions have been around for a while now, but they've gained in popularity, particularly in 2020, with some big car manufacturers entering the space. And also with coronavirus, many people are reconsidering whether they actually need to own a car. Now, one of the biggest names in the business is Drover. And joining me is Chief Marketing Officer Alex Rose, Chris Moyson, COO, and Nick Warren, Head of Supply. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
Morning.
How are you doing?
Lovely to have you on. Now, if viewers are watching this on YouTube and if you've got any questions to ask, feel free to drop them into the comments box and I'll do my best to ask it to the panel. But we'll start with mine. So, Alex, let me just turn to you first. Now, some viewers, that may be the first time they've actually heard the words car subscription. Simply, I mean, what are they?
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of an evolution of how people have been kind of increasingly comfortable with procuring products and services in outside of the car world. And I think subscription as a way of getting access to a product or a service is kind of increasingly mainstream. I think obvious example being something like your gym membership, but equally, if you think about things, the way that world is going, you can get your kind of clothes and a kind of bundle of new clothes every month on a subscription. Pret have launched their coffee subscription service, so 5 free coffees a day or 5 coffees a day for part of that subscription. And I guess there's an appeal to those non-automotive ways of managing your life through subscription, which are equally valid for cars. And I think the appeal is predictability in terms of the predictability of a monthly fee or monthly payment that's typically fixed. And the other element is a relatively lower degree of commitment. And clearly some subscriptions like gyms, there's contractual obligations for certain periods of time, but most subscription services have a lower contractual obligation and a higher level of flexibility than their kind of purchased or rental equivalent. And I think from a car point of view, car subscriptions are just increasingly playing their way into how people are used to managing their lives and managing their outgoing payments and managing the way that they access goods and services. And I think it's probably important, we can talk about this later on in the interview, I think it's probably important to say that although the flexibility aspect of a subscription is appreciated by our users, actually probably what's more appreciated is the fact that we bundle the car, the servicing, the tax, the breakdown cover, and optionally the insurance in that one monthly fee. And probably if you look at our customer data and our surveys, what people find most attractive about taking a car on subscription with Drover, and I suspect the same with kind of international equivalents, is less the fact they can sort of hand the car back or have a relatively low cancellation fee, and more the fact that one single payment, which is predictable and fixed, gets them this bundle of the car and then the services around it as a wrapper. And I think increasingly you could call it as much a concierge service as a subscription service, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Chris, this is an important point, really, isn't it? I think, people within the motor trade, and I'm very guilty of this, there's sometimes the tendency to assume that every car buyer is a car fanatic and they have read every single car magazine, they've read every single review about the car, they've lived and breathed this car before actually taking ownership of it. And they're going to own it for a number of years and polish it and wash it and everything like that. That's a very traditional vision of car ownership, still appeals to lots of people. But there's a tendency to assume that everybody's like that, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think we're probably all showing our age with that view. And what we see is our average subscriber is about 38. They are people that live busy lifestyles. They use, as Alex was saying earlier, they use subscription, things like their phones, Netflix, and the car is, for many people, is still a tool. And we're seeing a big shift away from company cars, even before COVID. And people still want a nice car, but they're not experts in buying cars, and they're not experts in leasing cars. And one of the lines the businesses use for a number of years now is cars made easy, and it's exactly what that is. But I think what we try and do is give people a good choice of cars, not an unlimited choice, but they pick the car on our website and they get that car and it's delivered to their door. And I think that's another big piece of what we do, is that the car's delivered to the door. And people are more and more used to having stuff delivered to the home, and obviously with COVID, that's accentuated that trait as well. So we have a huge logistics operation that within 48 hours of a request can have a car sitting on somebody's driveway or outside their house.
Yeah. We'll come on to the behind the scenes bit a little bit later on, but just a point that just crossed my mind then when you were talking, Chris, is that I think a lot of this is influenced by the fact that, cars these days, they're so good, aren't they? And people sort of know what they're getting, and it's a lot easier for customers to know, okay, I know that, for instance, a VW Golf, it's going to be absolutely fine for my needs, or a BMW 3 Series is going to be absolutely fine. And it's easier just to go onto a website such as Drover and order or create your own package. Whereas in the past, there was perhaps customers needed to test drive a little bit more. There was a little bit more of uncertainty about what cars were actually on the market, and potentially in the future, what with more electric cars coming on the market, there's less of a variance between cars, isn't there? It's very easy to choose cars these days, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can all, if we could Google within 10 seconds a review of a BMW 3 Series and probably have 10 different options of seeing somebody somewhere in the world test driving a BMW 3 Series, and that could be somebody doing in Australia, in the Middle East, or in the UK. It's effectively the same car. So people go and do their research online and then want to book online.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I think it's probably worth adding, James, I guess, a couple of things here. So first of all, the inability to test drive a car is very rare, is a very rarely heard kind of objection in the sales process. I'd also add that I think maybe there's a bit of a myth or an assumption that drivers who take a car on subscription are taking a car on a short-term basis because they have a short-term need, and that's not really the case. I think if you look at our historical sales mix, it's actually fairly conventional. Looking at the last, looking at October, our top 3 selling cars, or top 3 subscribed cars were 1 Series, 118 IM Sport, really great all-round car, Fiesta ST line, and I think the third was a 3008. It was either 3008 or a Golf Match. So I think that kind of speaks to Chris's point in that, our subscribers skew a bit younger, but they're not taking car on subscription for a particularly niche need. And I think probably also worth touching upon that point, I think there's probably an assumption that the average subscriber takes a car for a very, very short duration, or they sort of take one car for 3 months, change it, take another car, etc. You can do that with Drover and elsewhere, but the reality is that isn't really how people choose to use us. And as I say, the biggest appeal is this idea that someone else is doing the work for you, and you pay a fixed cost. And if the service light goes on, you tell us, we'll take the car away, we sort it out, etc., etc. And I think that's reflected in the average duration of a booking on Drover. I think when the business was launched, it was launched with a maximum of 12 months, with the idea that people would be using this kind of short-term need. The reality is, lately, average booking duration is about 15 months, and about 35% of our revenue comes from people booking at our maximum, which is 24 months. So there's a fairly kind of conventional user proposition, and that's reflected in the car mix.
Yeah. I know that one particular car manufacturer has come into the marketplace this year, and they've very much sort of upsold the idea that you can change your car every 3 months, and there's this sort of flexibility that there's sort of an assumption that that it's mandatory that you're going to change your car, which I think, you know, may work for some people, but for other people, you know, they've chosen that car for a reason, haven't they? And the idea that they've got to change into something else in 3 months' time doesn't always necessarily sit comfortably with them.
Yeah, and I think when we launched Drover, we had that opinion as well, that people would want, you know, exaggerating slightly, a 4x4 in the winter and a convertible in the summer. But I think British Psyche in particular is, you know, car is probably my second biggest choice, biggest expenditure, and you know, it's got my stuff in it. You know, I guess at our age, it's got our CDs in it, but you know, it's got the boot is full of your stuff, your coat, yeah, and it's actually a bit of a pain changing your car over. And you know, that's borne out in terms of our average subscription length's about 16 months. So, which, you know, from an operational perspective, makes it much easier for us as well.
Yeah, I'm interested, Chris, to talk, when you talk about people our age, I'm interested to know who you're talking about in this call, but
well, we won't talk about your Dire Straits CDs, Alex.
Oh, they're great. But yeah, I guess
it's more mini disc for you, Alex. Surely
that's the future. Yeah. I guess I would entirely back up Chris's point, and I think there's, as I say, that kind of need or that desire to switch a car around and have it taken away and replaced every 3 months. I just don't think it exists in that many people. And the analogy I would use is, so back in my career, I used to work for a car maker, and depending on how well that car maker was doing in a quarter or a year, you would get a new company car more or less frequently. And when the chips were down, you'd change your car every 6 weeks, and when the times were good and supply and demand were matching, you'd keep your car for 6 months to 12 months. And even replacing your car with something identical was just a drag, from the perspective of, as Chris says, your kind of your lifestyle is set up around that car and your radio settings and everything else. So it's possible, but I think that that use case is at best niche and at worst something of a myth.
Yeah. I think it's worth sort of spending just a little bit of time explaining the how it works. So, you know, the actual website, how people log on. So could we just talk about that and talk about how simple it is and, you know, the offering?
Sure thing. So I mean, we have, at any one point, we have a kind of a range of cars available, and we can talk about how those cars are procured and supplied maybe separately. I think at the moment we have about 150 cars on the site across 90 different kind of model group and trim combinations. So first things first, it's a bit like kind of going to a supermarket or having a shopping list. We try and fill cars in every possible category, from Fiesta or a Fiat 500, which is our smallest car, up to a GLE that you can take as well. Broadly matching kind of consumer demand, as you might see from SMMT data or an equivalent. You go on the site and you have the chance to select the duration you want your car for. So you could just take the car for a month, or even on just a rolling booking, so month by month, or 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, etc., up to a maximum of 24. And whether it's 24 or not, it depends on the terms upon which we've procured that car. From that point on, you're happy with the price per month, and you're happy with the car you want. You create an account, and from there you're taken through a approval process, which is a mixture of online and actually phone based. And that approval process includes things like, are you insuring the car yourself, or are you taking Drover insurance, which is a product that we have ourselves. It's kind of a market leading, very flexible insurance product, and one maybe Chris can expand upon if we have time. And then the other elements, of course, because it's a monthly payment, are around, do we think you can afford the car? And there is an open banking integration that we use, which is a kind of an affordability assessment, as well as some other kind of background checks we do. And all being well, the next step is to pick your delivery slot. So we tend to offer deliveries, as Chris says, sometimes just a couple of days in advance, but typically a few days to a week in advance, up to 14 days, I think. And the car arrives at your door. And there's a delivery fee depending on how far away you are from our kind of main holding centre in Bedfordshire. There's also that's paid every time you get a car or you change a car. And there's also a one-off joining fee. which is your way into Drover. But from that point on, you could take as many cars as you want. You will never pay that again.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so that's the customer facing bit. Nick, can I just turn to you and just talk about, the actual mechanics of how this all works? So, Alex just said that there's you've got a holding facility in Bedfordshire. I mean, first of all, how big is this? How many cars do you actually have, or you've got access to, and how do you get these cars around the country? It must be an absolutely enormous undertaking.
Well, actually, I think Chris will be better placed to speak about that, because Chris was actually involved in setting up the relationship. But you're bang on. It is an absolutely enormous undertaking. Chris, I'll hand over to you quickly.
Thank you for that. So we work with a partner, actually, a company called SMH Fleet Solutions, who are well known in the fleet logistics sector, and work with a number of OEMs. They've got a 25-acre site actually in Thurley Aerodrome, which is a big vehicle distribution park. I suspect at any one time there could be 20 or 30,000 cars there. And they've got a number of other locations around the UK, but we base the business out of the Bedfordshire site and then move the vehicles when required through other locations. So any one time we've normally got 250 vehicles there that are ready to go. As Alex said, you sort of pick the car on the website. Anything that's on the website that you see is physically at the distribution centre and ready to go. So theoretically, we can deliver the car within sort of 48 hours. SMH themselves do about 250,000 vehicle movements a year, as I said, for many of the OEMs. So they've got huge capacity to flex up and down our deliveries for us. Typically, we average about 25 deliveries a day and about 10 collections a day. And that can be as far as Penzance to John O'Groats, quite literally. I would say probably 60% of our deliveries are sort of south of Manchester, and then we have and sort of into the southeast, and then the rest of the deliveries are sort of around the northeast, further northwest, and actually less so in the Midlands, strangely, and I think that might be to do with the sort of demographic of people that live in the Midlands. So it's a huge target base for us, but we have the ability to flex those deliveries, and at a peak we'll do maybe 35 deliveries on a Saturday, on a Friday, and also deliveries over the weekend.
Yeah. Has coronavirus actually caused any problems in the actual logistics of everything?
It's impacted how we deliver the car. So, and Alex can probably talk about some of the creative we've done on making our customers understand how the car is delivered. But effectively, it's a sort of COVID secure, hygienic delivery. And anyone that's delivering anything really today, is obviously very conscious of that. But in the car world, it's quite unique because the parcel that's being delivered is being driven there, so we have to be very careful with switches, steering wheels, door handles, and all of those are cleansed before the vehicle's handed over.
Yeah, and that's right. I think kind of a broader point, James, is kind of the COVID impact and influence on the business as well. So prior to kind of late March, it was possible to collect your car from Bedfordshire as well and save us a delivery fee. Actually, before I joined the business, I'm not sure how many people did that, but of course that hasn't been possible for some time. But I think we've kind of, what we saw in terms of demand was, as you'd appreciate, kind of consumer uncertainty and lack of confidence in the future is unhelpful for any business, ourselves included, and kind of that kind of March period up to lockdown, a few days afterwards, were pretty slow. But actually, Q2 in particular and into Q3 were Drover's best to date. And I think we kind of worked pretty hard on maintaining our supply and gearing up towards a kind of COVID safe world, exactly Chris has said. We refilmed a TV ad that was all around disinfected delivery, as we call it. Kind of, I think that is I think this has been, clearly a challenging period in lots of ways, but actually delivering a car in a hygienic way and appearing on your doorstep and not making multiple visits to a place of business has probably been overall helpful to us, I'd say.
Yeah. I'd just add to that. I mean, from a supply side of things as well, it's helped with a lot of the partnerships we have in place. You can imagine the logistics chains they had set up just weren't quite working for them when lockdown was introduced. So having the ability to do that operationally, it's definitely helped our partners keep the cars churning out and getting more on the road.
Yeah. I mean, at a wider level, I mean, it's been something that we've been talking a lot about here at Car Dealer. About car auctions and how it's been difficult to actually, there's been this huge deluge of people wanting used cars, and dealers they can't actually physically get the cars from auction houses because transporters aren't working. Everything's been stilted because of coronavirus. But it's something that's affecting everybody, understandably. But can I just talk about or just ask about you're obviously seeing a different trend here because a lot of people, including dealers, are saying that people still remain unconvinced about buying cars online, getting them delivered at home, rather more than buying something on Amazon on a whim and then instantly regretting it, and you can just sling it away in the cupboard, can't you? Whereas with a car, it's something quite different. So you're obviously seeing a trend. I mean, how much has this trend been influenced by coronavirus and people having different lifestyle changes this year?
Great question, and it's always hard to know what 2020 would have looked like otherwise. In terms of coronavirus, and equally, it's different. It's I'm not certain how many people would have chosen to collect a car rather than having it delivered if it was possible, etc. So there are certain caveats there. But listen, I think you hit the nail on the head earlier, James, when you talked about the fact that cars are becoming not homogenized, and I think every car manufacturer would hate me if I said that, but certainly more. I think the way they drive, the way they feel, etc., is as much as anything driven by kind of safety and ergonomics. Is just becoming more predictable. And I think I suspect that if you look at what really floats a consumer's boat about a car, it's as much going to be about the infotainment, the kind of the emissions, taxation, fuel consumption, probably more than the driving experience and the feel of the pedals and the layout and everything else. And I say that as a kind of lifelong car guy, but I just suspect that is less of an issue for more people than it used to be. And exactly as Chris has said, you can research this stuff in a lot of places online or other sources. I think taking a Golf as a good example, as Golfs and Fiestas will be a big part of our supply mix next year. I've never driven the current generation Fiesta, but I have no doubt that if I were to look at it as a solution, it would drive exactly how I expect. And I think the final point I'd add on that is, well, two more points. I think the first point I'd say is the nature of a subscription is, if you wish to and you really don't get on with the car, you can hand it back early for a fee. And how early you hand it back depends on where you are in the agreement. And I think the final point I would make is that we're still appealing to a kind of innovator, early adopter audience, and that's reflected in the fact that they're probably a bit more affluent than average. And I say that from the fact that this bundling of services and shorter durations comes at a bit of a premium, and they skew slightly younger. And I think probably there's an audience who feel comfortable accepting a car as a bit more of a tool, and the driving experience mattering less. And then there's an audience which is probably still the majority, who feel that at the very least, getting comfortable with how it drives is kind of a part of that big kind of commitment to that purchase.
Yeah. Chris or Alex or Nick or whoever, can we just talk about customer profile? Because I'm sure, Drover and car subscriptions tend to, this is just a generalization, an assumption on my part, but I would assume that they appeal to perhaps younger people who are a little bit more savvy when it comes to car subscriptions. And perhaps, we all hear the stories of younger generations than mine, who don't have this affinity with cars anymore, and they do see them as more of a service. So when it comes to Drover, I mean, for instance, how many customers do you have? And also, what's the sort of the proportion who are young, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we've kind of covered part of this already, I guess, but to expand on it a little bit more. I mean, we've had over 10,000 customers, of which several thousand are driving around in Drover cars today. So I think it's a bigger business than perhaps most people appreciate. And as I say, particularly the kind of post-lockdown one period was very strong for us in terms of new users. I would challenge slightly this question that people don't care about cars, or rather our demographic doesn't care about the car they're driving, because if you look at kind of where we tend to skew away from the broader market taste, there's a premium or semi-premium skew, and I think a good example of that would be the 1 Series or a Mini, where it's kind of universally seen as a good car with a little bit of extra street cred. So I don't think our audience is viewing a car as a kind of functional appliance or anything like that. But in terms of the user base, it's, as I say, it's probably more conventional than perhaps people might expect, with the big exception that it skews younger. So the average age, as Chris says, is 38. We actually it would skew younger still, but we don't advertise, or we don't spend money advertising online to customers under 25, because we find they're more likely to have affordability issues, to be honest, and also because our minimum customer age is 22. So it would actually skew younger still if we chose to kind of turn that tap on. But other than that, as I say, their car taste is relatively conventional with a slight premium skew, and they are predominantly urban or suburban in nature. In terms of things like mileage, average mileage of a Drover driver is a bit lower. I think it's about 750 miles a month, that kind of thing. So it works out about 9,000 miles a year. But not drastically so. It's not just being driven around the street corner and kind of around the block. It's just doing a slightly lower mileage. Yeah, not sure, Chris or Nick, if there's anything you want to add to that, having been in the business a bit longer than I have.
Yeah, I think that your point on mileage is actually really interesting. I mean, my background is the leasing and rental industry, and you kind of work on a minimum of 25,000 miles a year. What's interesting that I've seen is that we do mirror very much that sort of average car driver, not only in, as Alex already mentioned, the type of car they want to drive, but also how many miles they drive as well. And what's great for us is that creates ultimately a really desirable used car for us to remarket at some point.
Yeah. Chris, could we just talk about electric cars? And I'm thinking here that perhaps for some people, they're considering going electric, but they don't actually want to be tied into a 3-year PCP with one. Are you seeing people, taking out subscriptions on electric cars because they're wanting to sort of, put a toe in the water in that kind of ownership?
We are very much so, yeah. Electric and hybrid, strangely. There are still a lot of people that even aren't sure about a hybrid car. And what we see with the subscriptions on those cars is they tend to be a bit shorter, because even from a subscription perspective, people need to understand that they can get on with it, understand not only the cost of charging, but the charging infrastructure. And as we know, that varies dramatically around the UK. But our demand for electric cars is definitely growing as the range gets better as well, and they become more useful for people, quite frankly. So if you look at the website today, we've certainly got Tesla on there. We've normally got Leaf and a few Zoes available. But historically, it's been, for us, it was originally a conversion into hybrid cars. So most of the new cars we have now are hybrid variants, and it's now starting to move into to the EV world.
Yeah. An open question to the three of you here, but car subscriptions have been around for a while. I mean, and car manufacturers have been here before. This year we've seen Jaguar, Land Rover, and Volvo entering the marketplace as well. Is the car subscription model a difficult one to crack, especially for OEMs, or is in general, is it a difficult place to operate in?
It is because what we see, and we work with a number of OEMs, so we have a number of white label offerings with OEMs, both in the UK and France. And one of the messages that Nick and I have a real difficulty in making the OEM understand is that people are generally, and Alex can probably expand on this a bit more, people are actually looking for a car subscription before they look for a car. And we see much greater conversion rate on a car that's within our white label solution. Much greater conversion on the car from our own website, even though that car might also be sitting on a white label solution for an OEM. I think the other big challenge we have, or the OEMs have, is that, you know, as part of the subscription service, the consumer wants the car delivered to their front door and not collect it from a dealer. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges the OEMs have got with launching a service.
Yeah, and I guess, James, as well, like I think maybe one or two OEMs have fallen into a similar trap that, frankly, Drover has fallen into the past, in misunderstanding the subscription need or subscription opportunity, and probably leaning too hard on this idea of choice, flexibility, and low commitment. And whereas the reality is the most appeal, and we see this in customer surveys and in surveying prospects as well, the greatest appeal every time is not this idea you can sort of be done with it and hand it back. The greatest appeal is that someone is doing all this work for you and you just pay this predictable fee. And I think when I think about a couple of OEM propositions, they've probably geared towards flexibility and choice and swapping more unnecessarily, I'd say, or maybe with the same initial misunderstanding, frankly, that Drover had in its kind of history around the greatest benefit.
Lastly, I feel as though I could talk to you about this all day because I find it absolutely fascinating. But my final point really is to people watching this, and it's to dealers. And I there may be some dealers out there a little bit worried that car subscriptions are coming along and they may be taking business away. I mean, could you actually see a moment in time where car subscriptions actually, replace PCPs, or they replace some sort of traditional part of the car ownership landscape?
I mean, if I jump in here, from my perspective, if that's going to happen, it will be a long way off. In terms of completely replacing PCP, we work with dealerships, and yes, subscriptions becoming more and more popular. I think there's room for both worlds. There'll always be a customer that's looking for a longer term commitment, and they're quite happy to do so. I foresee maybe, 20 years down the road, you might be looking at actually subscriptions more popular because of the flexibility that goes with it. And that's where I see actually it will fold into a dealership and manufacturer world. And I suppose subscription will become more normal rather than us being the interesting idea.
Yeah.
I think I'd add to that just 2 points. Thank you, Nick. I think I'd add 2 points to that. The first thing to point out is we do buy cars from dealers. So a subscription via Drover, often that car originates for dealer sale on terms we agree with manufacturer. So that's kind of an important point to make, and increasingly our supply will kind of head in that direction next year. So in that sense, the growth of Drover is in many ways equally the growth of the dealership. I would say as well that, listen, I think we're in the middle of kind of planning our media strategy for next year and who we go after. We're not going after a purely mainstream audience. I think a classic kind of marketing strategy will talk about innovator, early adopter, early majority, late majority, laggard. We're in the innovator and early adopter territory, which is the theory goes is 15-16% of the total market. So that's really where we're playing in terms of people who are kind of comfortable embracing a new ownership model, and I think that's reflected in the skew towards younger buyers, or younger owners, I should say, and probably the skew towards propensity to pay a little bit more. Our average monthly subscription is a little over £400, so that'll skew higher than a typical PCP or PCH.
Yeah. Wow, fantastic. I'm really sorry. We're gonna have to leave it there for today. But Alex, Nick, Chris, absolute pleasure talking to you. It's been super finding out more about the service and the market in general. So thanks very much for coming on today.
Thanks very much for having us.
Cheers. Thank you.
Well, if you'd like to be involved in a Car Dealer Live just like this one, then please do email me, james.batchelor@blackballmedia.co.uk. But thanks again to our panel for joining us today. But until next time, thanks for watching and bye-bye.